Hi, my name is Kate from the website acleanbee.com, where I write about all things cleaning related, from tidying to organization to sustainability and minimizing waste. The content you see on acleanbee.com is all focused around living a greener and cleaner lifestyle. What you are looking at now is the 2018 version of my annual budget document. To access a copy of your own, click the link in the description box below and follow the instructions to receive a link to this template in your inbox. Once you receive the link to this template, you will notice that it is a read-only document or view-only document. That means you will not be able to edit any of the information in this document, type in any of the cells. I can try and type right now, nothing's going to change. So step one is to actually make a copy of this view-only template that will be saved in your Google Drive. So if you go to File, make a copy, rename it to whatever you want to call it. My 2018 budget template. Press OK, and you will have that saved in your drive, and that copied version will be editable. For demonstration purposes, I have already saved a copy of this template and filled it in with some dummy content for the months of January and February. The first tab you will see is the Summary tab. Everything on this tab is driven by formulas, meaning you will not have to edit anything on this tab. It should update automatically for you. At the top, you will see your income versus expenses and your net balance trending month over month. So as you can see here for February and January, I have those numbers laid out. Down below, you'll see breakouts of these income and expense numbers at a more granular and category level. Then at the very bottom, you will see a graphical representation of how much you're spending in each expense category. So with this dummy information, we can see that this pretend person is spending the majority of their income in home, and you can see that represented in this expense area as well. Next, we have the 2018 Income tab, and this is just an expanded view of your monthly income categories and your investments. I will also show you, if you have debt figures that you would like to keep track of, how to add those to this section as well. Then to the right, you have your Expenses tab, and this really just shows you the amount you're spending in each category on a super granular level by subcategory. So as I'm scrolling through, if you're watching this and thinking to yourself that you don't need all of these categories, or maybe you would like to add some that are missing, or rename a category, don't worry, I will walk you through how to make those types of edits later in this video. Next, I'm going to walk you through the January tab of this document. However, if you're watching this and it's currently April or August or October, don't worry about these earlier months. Click into the month that you're in currently and start exactly where you are. Regardless of what tab you are starting from, the first thing you are going to want to pay attention to is your starting net worth and your cash balance numbers. So these will be hard-coded numbers in this document, not driven by formulas. To calculate your starting net worth, the way I do it is I try and keep things as simple as possible. I take my current cash balance plus investments minus any debt, and that ends with my starting net worth. Investments can include things like your investment portfolio, your 401k or IRA or other retirement plans. It can also include things like properties, cars that you might own, any of those types of things. The way I value my car and home investments is by just referencing at the beginning of the month websites like Redfin or Zillow for my house, and websites like Kelley Blue Book for my car, and then I subtract out what I owe still on my mortgage or my car loan as a debt. Then my starting cash balance, I like to track this just for keeping tabs on how much cash we might have on hand at any given month and determining whether or not we should transfer some of that over to an investment portfolio or invest it elsewhere. But that's really just the sum of your checking and savings account. Now that you have your starting point from a net worth and cash balance perspective hard-coded into this document, the next thing I would advise you to do is start inputting your expense and income line items for the month. The way my husband and I usually do this in our actual document is twice a month So once in the middle and once at the end of each month, we simply export all of our bank and credit card expense and income items and copy and paste them into this document. A couple of things to pay attention to. One is all expenses I include as a negative number, and any income or possible returns would be positive numbers. The next thing that I want to point out is the drop downs that are included under the category section, both under expenses and under income. So the way that these drop downs are populated is by what's called a data validation. You can see that by going to data, then data validation, and you can see the cell that you're currently highlighting, which is R4 in your cell range. And then your criteria is pulling in all of the things that are listed from cell B45 to B120. And if we go over to that section of the spreadsheet, you'll see cell B45 all the way down to B120 includes all of those subcategories that you saw when we were on the expense summary tab. The same thing goes when you were to look at the income section. So it includes all of these line items that were also included in the income summary tab. And now they're populated in this income dropdown as category options. The last thing I want to point out over here is this credit card item or credit card section. So I like to include this because sometimes my husband's inputting a line item, sometimes I am, and sometimes we have some suspicious charges on various credit cards. I just want to know which credit card each charge is coming from, just in case I have to investigate something further. Or if I have to make a return on something, I know where to find that credit card, where it came from, so that I can use that as a receipt. It's just a helpful way to keep organized. The next section of this January tab I want to show you is the investments or net worth section. So you'll see in this net worth summary for January, your starting net worth is $100,000, and that is just a copy of whatever your starting net worth was for the month. Your ending balance is going to be your starting balance plus any increase or difference in your investments minus your expenses plus any income. So you'll see we left in this example the month with an increase in cash savings of $16. And then we also left the month with an increase in your investments of $1,015. So that plus $16 would be an increase in $1,031, which is the difference in your net worth from your starting balance to your ending balance, just for the month of January. Now, as I scroll down here, you'll see just my investments summarized below. For this dummy template, I have listed here just my 401k, IRA accounts, an investment portfolio, some pretend stock numbers, and I have my previous month numbers in here hard-coded just because this is our first time inputting any data, so there's nothing for this to pull from. So my previous month numbers should represent where I left the end of December, since I'm in the January tab, in each of those investment accounts. Then here is where this person ended the month of January. So these are again hard-coded based on the month-end numbers for each of these investment accounts. And then this section here is really just a formula-driven difference between previous month and the end of the current month. So you'll see overall whether or not you had increases or decreases in any given portfolio. Now, if you were to go ahead and look in your next month's investment section, you'll see again, you have your previous month, your current month, and the difference. The only change here is in future months, your previous month numbers are going to be just a cell reference to the previous month's current month end. So this is going to represent the end of January's numbers for this IRA account. So if I go back to January, you ended with $26,000. That pulls in that $26,000 here. So this is all your previous month numbers. Then again, you hard code in whatever the month of February, those numbers end in this section here. And again, this is formula driven, difference between all of those in previous month and current month numbers. And you'll see your sum up difference at the top under this section here. Say you're looking at these line items and you're thinking to yourself, I don't have those types of investment accounts, or I don't care to track those. I have other things that I want to track. Or maybe even you have debt figures that you want to add in to these. It's very easy to make changes. Say you wanted to change this to rename it to stock portfolio or something like that. I don't know, probably not a great example, but you're going to want to make sure any change you make in the name of one tab is reflected on every single subsequent tab and every single previous tab. You want it to be aligned throughout the entire spreadsheet. The reason I say that is because under 2018 income, you're going to have an item here that says other stock like it originally was. You're going to want to update that, to say stock portfolio. So then you start to pull in those numbers each month. And that is important because on your summary tab, when I look at my income and my investments, it will be included in this summation here. So if I go to income here, you have 500, which is summarizing all of these line items here. It's going to align to the 500 that's in your summary tab at the very beginning of the spreadsheet. So that's one thing that's important to note. Say you want to delete something. Say you don't care about your stock portfolio. Do the same exact exercise. You just delete it on out for every single month, including your income section. You can just delete that out. And then you'll see your investments are going to reflect whatever numbers you have left in here. Now, if you want to add something to this list, say you have a debt figure that you want to track, like a student loan debt, for example. The way I would add that is label it debt, student loans, and start filling in the information as you would for any other section of this investments portion of the sheet. So say you were starting, or you ended December with $80,000 in student loan debt. I used a mortgage calculator actually, but I think it works just fine. So I input $80,000 with a pretend 5% interest rate. I'm going to assume that I'll pay it off in 10 years, and I just wanted to show the first 12 months of payments. So if I scroll down here, you'll see for my first payment, interest plus principal totals about $850. I have that payment over here in my expense line items for student loans. If I go back over here, that means that I end the month with a balance of $79,485, just about. So if I paste that in here, I'll make it formatted the same as everything else. The last thing I want to try and remember is for debt items, I like to keep them as negative numbers so that my totals align to whatever my total investments are minus my debt. And then the last thing I want to do is copy and paste this sum formula from the previous differences so that I can see what difference in principal I was actually able to pay off for that particular month. So in this case, in January, I paid $515 off on my principal of my student loan debt out of my total $850 student loan payment. Again, you're going to want to make sure that this debt student loans line item is reflected in every single subsequent month. And in every single subsequent month, you're also going to want to make sure you copy down your previous month's reference. So you'll see here it pulled in the ending balance from January. And then what I can do is go back into this calculator, pull in the ending balance for my second payment. Again, reformat that to a match, write it as a negative, and copy down the difference. So again, for February, out of my $850 student loan payment, I paid down an additional $517 in principal. So you can see how that can continue on through the rest of these months. Then if I go into my income summary, I add this as a line item, and then I can copy and paste the previous month's formulas, or the previous line's formulas. And then I go into my summary tab, and that investments sum right here is going to reflect exactly the sum that you see right here. So it includes that student loan increase. The last thing I want to point out is, say you have a lot more investments and debt line items than you see here, and you want to add a couple of rows. You can do that, but again, you want to make sure you do it consistently for all tabs. So if I want to add 3 rows here, for instance, I would need to go in and add 3 more rows in February, 3 more rows in March, and so on down the line. The other thing you want to keep in mind is this sum. Because I added them within the sum range, it expanded to include all the cells up to 28. But if you're noticing that this summation right here for your previous month, current month difference are not including all of your new rows, you're going to want to make sure to change this cell number right here to include that in your totals. Same thing for the subsequent months. And then lastly, the same thing for your income month. So you might want to make sure that this summation includes for all the 3 additional cells that or additional rows that you just added on, so that when you go into your summary tab, it would be reflected in your total here. Down below the net worth and investment section of the spreadsheet is going to be this cash balance summary. So this is going to show you where you start and where you end cash-wise each month. So starting balance is going to be pulling from this starting balance number here in cell L1 that you hard-coded at the beginning. And the ending balance is going to be reflective of whatever your starting balance was plus your income minus your expenses. The other thing to note as you scroll down the page is your expenses and income line items. So you're going to see they're broken out by previous, actual, and then the difference between the two. Now for our January tab, because we don't have any previous monthly data in this particular spreadsheet, everything is going to be blank. Then the actual is going to be pulled by formula, referencing whatever this particular expense is. It's going to look in your expenses. So it's going to look through column R. So for that particular item, it's going to look for your phone bill expense and pull in whatever that number is. So in this case, $75 for your phone bill. Then the difference is just the difference between your previous month and your actual month. The reason this is helpful is so that you can track whether or not you are on track to increase your savings each month, or whether or not you had a bigger month of spending. You can understand what your trend is month over month by doing these calculations. If I look at February, kind of like what we were looking at for the previous month portion of our investments here, the previous month portion of our expenses is also going to be pulled from these cell references in the previous month's tab. So for January, it's going to pull in whatever your previous month's phone bill was, and then again, it's going to use this formula to reference this phone bill name and pull in wherever you have your phone bill in your expenses. So that's again $75 for the second month in a row. So you'll see the difference here is 0 because your phone bill is going to be consistent each month. Same thing goes for your income section. All of these numbers are going to be pulled from the income section up here. Those are all cell referenced items as well. Something important to note or to keep in mind is that as you're filling in the spreadsheet, this cash balance, expenses, income section, you do not need to touch any of this. Everything is being driven by a formula and it will populate automatically. The only time you would make a change to any of this is if you wanted to change some of these subcategory names or subcategories or categories in general. And that goes for both the expenses and the income sections here. And there are 3 ways to make changes. The simplest way is just simply renaming one of these subcategories. So for example, say you wanted to rename rent/mortgage to just say mortgage. So make that change here. You'll notice that all of a sudden that $sign went straight to 0. The reason is, if you go back to your expenses, it's still referencing rent/mortgage. So if I was to start typing mortgage, that new subcategory appears. And if I go back down to my expenses, the $1,500 is back on this line. The other thing you need to keep in mind is you have to do the exact same exercise for every subsequent month. So if I go to February, I need to change that to mortgage. It pulls in the previous month because that one's all referencing the correct word. But then on this month, again, you get that error message, invalid. Click down, you'll be able to find mortgage in the listing of subcategories. Go back to February. Mortgage, you've got your $1,500 reference there. Same thing if you go here, mortgage, you've got your March reference here, and you have yet to fill out your March actuals. The other place you're going to have to change it, in addition to all the subsequent months, is on this expenses summary tab where it says rent/mortgage. Change it, type in mortgage, and you'll see those January and February payments populate right here. The second easiest change to make would be to remove a subcategory or an entire set of categories, subcategories in general. So for example, say you don't have children yet. So none of these category items or subcategory items really apply to you or your lifestyle, and you know you're not going to be having any children in the following months of the year. So what you're going to do is select all of those rows. I scroll to the right to make sure I don't have any expense or income line items that are going to be impacted by this deletion of columns, or deletion of rows. And then you delete those rows from the sheet. You do the exact same thing on all subsequent tabs. Now, if you did have line items to the right, so say you had a long list of expenses right here, you could also just delete this portion of cells, highlight everything else below it. And click and drag those up. It's going to accomplish the same thing. What you ideally want to have happen is for every category title to be in the same row as the previous month. So every day, 87, every day, 87. Then you're going to go to your expenses summary. You're going to find where it says children. Go ahead and delete all of those rows. Then when you go into your total summary, you no longer have children listed as one of your categories here. Automatically deletes. And that is how you remove categories. The third and probably the most complicated change you can make is adding categories and adding subcategories. Subcategories isn't so difficult, but adding a full new category to the bottom of this list or anywhere else in this section can be a little bit tricky for a couple of reasons, and I'll walk you through why. So let's say you have a pet and you want to add food, vet, other, couple of expense types. I'm going to keep these formatted the same as the subcategories above, just for consistency. So I just added these items down below. Now the next thing you're going to want to do is any formulas that are from the section above, you're going to want to copy and paste those for this section down below. The next thing you're going to want to check before you start doing this for the subsequent tabs is your data validation dropdown. Does that include all of your new pet subcategories? You'll see here, no, it does not. The reason is, as we discussed at the beginning of this demonstration, when you go into data validation, it's taking from B45 to B115. Now, if I look down where I added the pet subcategory, it's starting at 115, but it goes all the way to 117. So you're going to want to make sure that this data validation is going to cell 120. So now if I check in here, scroll down, I've got food, vet, other. I should probably name that pet food for clarification purposes, but for this example, it's probably just fine. So that's fine, but then you go to the next cell and it just stops at food again. In order to make sure that data validation copies all the way down, highlight the rest of row R, go to data, data validation, B120, save. Now you have all three of those subcategories listed under your data validation dropdown for every single row in column R. Then the next thing you're going to want to do is repeat this exact process for all subsequent months and in your expenses summary tab. So first, make sure you have enough cells below whatever your last section is to input that additional expense section. Then what I do is I just copy whatever is in the previous section, copy, paste, oops, I want to leave a space there for formatting, rename this as pets, then it was food, vet, and other. Now I want to make sure, perfect, it's referencing this as my cell reference, looking in January for this particular cell. This one should be looking at February, and so on. So that's perfect. The other thing I want to make sure is that it's summing the correct amount of cells. So I want it to sum all of these. Make sure that carries over to the right. Copy that over. So you're summing all of them correctly. So if I was to add in expenses, they would populate here, and they will populate here under this new pet section in the summary tab. So that is how you add subcategories or full-on categories to your expense section. You do the exact same process if you wanted to change, add, or remove any subcategories in your income section. You would just make sure you're making those extra edits to the income summary tab, not the expense summary tab. And there you have it, your 2018 budget document. If you are comfortable with Excel formulas, this will be a breeze to edit. If not, then just do your best to stick to the template as it is. Either way, you will benefit from organizing your finances each month. Thank you so much for watching, and let me know how it works for you in the comments below. I'd really appreciate it. Thank you. Take care.